to write a big book out of it. And so I started taking these courses. I already had my degree, and I was studying for the MCAT. In fact, my mom, who has Alzheimer's now, but she heard that I was going to give a talk to Vietnamese community, and she woke up from her dream and she said, "Whatever you do, don't tell their children to give up medicine and go into writing." And because that's exactly what I did. I took UC Extension courses and I started writing. But when you're in love and you just fall out of love, or you just have your heart broken, you cannot give a framework to the story because you're still hurting, you're still falling. And when you're falling, you don't know how far you're going to go before you hit bottom, right? And so you cannot tell the story because you're still falling. So it was very hard for me to tell the narrative of my love life. But then there was a passage in the pieces that I was writing in my class that said something along this line. It said, if you love someone and you share your life with someone and share a private joke, private, routine, sense of humor with that person, and when you lose that person, you, in essence, have lost a country. You have become an exile. And upon reading that passage again some times later, I started to cry. And by now I'm 22, the 11-year-old kid who fled away from his memory, started to cry. But I wasn't crying about the relationship. I was crying because I lost a real country. I was crying because I never dealt with the first heartbreak, which is what it felt like to be in that refugee camp in Guam, to listen to the news on the BBC announcing the fall of Saigon, to wonder what happened to his dad, his relatives who were stuck behind, his family members and relatives, his dogs. I had 4 dogs, and his family, friends, and his school friends. Everything he knew and loved was gone. Right? The whole country disappeared, and next thing you know, he's in this refugee camp that they barely managed to build the day before, or 3 days before I came. And they were still building bathroom when I got there because they weren't ready to deal with all these people who were walking around like zombies, because we were still dressed like people in Saigon, except for we didn't have a country. And that kid never dealt with the loss. He never looked back, And so I wept. But I wasn't crying for myself. I was crying for other people that I left. So I started to write. Seriously writing. And the words poured out, language poured out. I found a way to tell stories. And I wasn't telling story of my romantic life. I was telling the story of what it's like for relatives who die in the open sea. What it's like to write, to ask for medicine, and us trying to roll up $20 bills or $50 bills into care packages that we send home, and we stuff them in toothpaste. And then we write notes like, hope you will smile, and hoping that the communists won't take the money, right? Because back then it takes 6 months to send a package home. And I started writing what it's like for my parents who have, had these amazing positions in Vietnam. My father was a general. My mom was like this really lovely public woman, admired in Vietnam, to become a short-term cook, a short cook in a restaurant and try to save us from complete destitution at the end of Mission Street. And I started writing about refugees. And next thing I knew, my teacher took my work and gave it to professors at San Francisco State. And one day I went to the class, and she said to me, she said, "You are not, Andrew, you are not going to medical school. You are going to creative writing school program at San Francisco State, and they already read your work, they love what you do, and all you have to do is fill out the application and you are in. They're waiting for you, Andrew. This is what you're supposed to do." And my first line was, "Oh my God, my mom is going to kill me." And I filled out the application and I got it. And that was where it all began, because I went away from biochemistry. I forgot all about it, MCAT, and I started writing. And I started writing seriously. And I started writing about things that moved me. And within about a semester, I started getting published, which is very rare for students of creative writing. And then the writer Richard Rodriguez found me and came in and asked if I wanted to write for a news service. And my first reaction was, I'm not a journalist. I don't know anything about, world philosophies and politics. I'm a biochemist. I'm just still trying to learn how to write. And he said, "It doesn't matter. I've read your work, and I think you're great. You'll be a great contribution to us." And so I started to write for this news service, and within a year, I ended up traveling to Asia to cover boat people experiences in Hong Kong. I went into detention center, and I wrote about what it's like to face repatriation at the end of the Cold War, when the West no longer wanted you and you're no longer a political pawn, where going back to the homeland was the only direction that the West wants you to go, rather than in the old day during the Cold War, you're welcome as political refugees. And people were committing suicide in the camps, and I wrote about that. And then I went to Vietnam itself, and I covered the war, the end of the Cold War, and what it's like at the end of the Cold War. And all this was very new to me, because I was this kid who didn't even speak Vietnamese, and all these things started coming back. And I started remembering, my journey to remember, I started remembering my past. I started owning up that past rather than running away from that past. And that past becomes part of my narrative as an American. I tell the story in a way to become American. And so I went to Vietnam, I covered the end of the Cold War, and I remember my first struggle was how to tell the end of the Cold War in a way that would make sense. And I went to the zoo. I went to the zoo because that's where I hang out as a child sometime. And I went to the zoo at the time when an elephant had died the night before. And there was this long line in 1991 of people with buckets. And I was really perplexed. And it turned out that the zookeeper was not making enough money, so he was cutting the elephant meat to sell it to people because they didn't have enough meat, they didn't have protein. And so I started writing about what it's like to live in Vietnam circa 1991. And so people were lining up to eat dead elephant meat. And I kind of tied that into the failure of the communist ideology, like a dead elephant. And I got all these awards. And I started writing more and more and more, and I traveled the world. And every time I win an award, I would give it to my parents. And until recent times, my parents had this big house, and there is this mantle. And every time I win an award, they would put it on this mantle. And there would be this obligatory walk where you're supposed to go by there, and my parents would say, "These are Andrew Lam's awards." Right? And my parents never call me Andrew, they call me Yung in Vietnamese. Right? But when I eavesdrop, they always say my name as Andrew Lam to people. Why? Because people know who Andrew Lam is. His work is published. He's on NPR. He's in Washington Post and all that. So Vietnamese call him up, my dad up, and say, "Oh, we just heard Andrew Lam on radio." And so when he talked to people, it's Andrew Lam, right? So it's a long way to say that in the long bout of things, we come full circle. And my parents became very proud of me, And my mom has a way to explain why I am the way I am. And I have to say in Vietnamese because it's a beautiful phrase. She say, cha mẹ sinh con, trời sinh tính. Which means parents give birth to children, but God gives them personality. And it certainly applies to me because I found my way in life. I found my direction in life. And I found my path in life, not rejecting my past, but owning it and making it my own story. Because in a way, for me, it was my way of paying homage to my past, and to be free from that past is to own it and to live it and to explain it and share it. So that's the story of how I became a writer. And I'm going to read passages from the book so that you can have questions after.